What happens when a girl comes out and accuses one of history's most important men of disturbing behavior, and why does no one seem to care, even if she is telling the truth? Watch the video until the end to find out what awful acts John F. Kennedy perpetrated on Elizabeth Taylor when she was 15. It was a time when young females were treated like ornaments rather than stars to attract guys. This video is the untold side of Elizabeth Taylor's story, one she carried quietly for decades. Let's comment 1 if you love Elizabeth Taylor's beauty, or 0 if not, and keep watching as we reveal the truth behind it. Elizabeth Taylor's allegations. And like all other women at the time, Elizabeth was owned by MGM. We are not discussing rhetoric here. They literally owned her. They oversaw her hair, nutrition, look, and even her relationships. Studio bosses chose who she dated, who she appeared with in public, and where she went after work. What could be creepier? When she was just 15, Elizabeth was forced to attend dinners and studio parties with older men who regarded her as a piece of flesh to be consumed rather than a child star. And among those individuals was a young man named John Kennedy. At the time, Kennedy was in his late 20s. He was a military veteran with political aspirations and a known thirst for ladies. He wasn't yet president or senator, but he was already well connected, charming, and dangerous in all the wrong ways. According to Elizabeth Taylor, John was one of several powerful men she was introduced to by her managers. But the narrative did not end there. Taylor admitted to being seduced decades later in a mind-blowing confession. Biography. No, she was groomed by John F. Kennedy at one of these studio-arranged occasions. But was it true seduction or something darker? We won't keep you waiting long, and we'll tell you this right away. Taylor was a victim, and she said her meeting with Kennedy occurred when she was still a virgin. You understand what this means, right? It indicates that John F. Kennedy, the future president of the United States of America, used an underage adolescent girl, controlled by the Hollywood studio system. Some think it was voluntary. Others claim Elizabeth was misled in a threesome with Robert Stack, as were so many other victims of the silent plague in mid-century Hollywood. Why did she keep it a secret for so long? Why didn't anyone appear to care when she eventually opened up decades later? Why did Elizabeth enter the world of show business? Was it a dream or her passion? The fact is that Elizabeth had no say in this. When she was 15, she had already gone through more than most women do in a lifetime, and her mother, Sarah, was a failed actress. She placed all of her goals on her daughter's shoulders and tossed her in front of Hollywood's wolves. Her father, Francis, was generally absent, giving MGM and her mother complete control on her decisions. Many of those judgments led her into the arms of men who were much too old, strong, and hungry. Even at an early age, Elizabeth knew how to play the game. She grinned, she performed, she obeyed, because saying no was not an option. Not when your career hinged on becoming the studio's ideal little angel. But did Elizabeth Taylor fully comprehend what was happening to her? Did she agree, or was she simply another young girl trapped in the depths of darkness? Elizabeth was compelled to spend several nights with John, and these experiences haunted her for the rest of her life. She never mentioned it publicly during his administration or after his killing. However, private chats chronicled by biographers and close associates revealed that the events were both influential and destructive. And it was not only Kennedy. The nights with Kennedy introduced her to a world she would never entirely escape. High-profile relationships, emotionally abusive marriages, and relentless pressure to project the image of a goddess while her soul was polluted. The questions start to mount up. If Kennedy actually took Elizabeth Taylor's virginity at the age of 15, how many others were present? More ominously, how could everyone around her, including her mother, studio executives, and even the press, allow it to happen without blinking an eyelid? Why didn't anyone protect Elizabeth Taylor? The rationale is really simple. In the 1940s, males wielded absolute control, and girls like Elizabeth were regarded as expendable. The more attractive, the more profitable. And the more profitable, the less control they had over their lives. But what effect did this early tragedy have on Elizabeth? How did it influence her decisions in love, marriage, and motherhood? Did that explain why she married 8 times and picked violent men? Most importantly, were these decisions the reason she nearly killed herself? No one has ventured to pose these questions until now. Elizabeth Taylor married for the first time in 1950, only 3 years after her purported meeting with John F. Kennedy. She was 18. The groom was Nicky Hilton, the heir to Hilton Hotels, and the wedding was a media event. It was packed with opulence and majesty. Fun fact, MGM paid for the wedding not because they believed in love or cared for Elizabeth, but because they thought it would boost ticket sales. The populace saw Elizabeth as a princess. She represented a significant investment for the studio. But behind closed doors, she was an adolescent girl embarking on yet another romance she didn't completely comprehend. And the horror started almost immediately. Nicky Hilton was an abusive man. Elizabeth subsequently confessed that he beat her up anytime he had a reason, regardless of how short their marriage was. Her honeymoon in Europe resulted in tears, fighting, and bruises all over her body. She intended to leave after a few months, but the studio insisted she wait. A divorce would not be good for their new adult star. But Elizabeth could not wait. Like John, she had been used, dumped, and expected to grin through it all. The marriage lasted just 8 months. Elizabeth Taylor's toxic relationships and their impact on her life, it was the first of several poisonous relationships that reflected her childhood trauma. Most people assumed that Elizabeth had spent her entire life pursuing love. But wait until the conclusion of the video, because we'll reveal exactly what was going on inside her thoughts. You wouldn't imagine how the world could poison such a beautiful young spirit. The torment didn't stop right there. To rediscover love and freedom, she married 7 more times to 6 different men. And virtually all of these partnerships followed the same path: older guys, power imbalances, ego difficulties, and ultimately violence. But one stood out beyond the rest, not only for its ferocity, but also for its public anger and the ensuing global debate. Yes, we are discussing her romance with Richard Burton. Burton represented everything Elizabeth had been cautioned to avoid: charismatic, wild, intelligent, and prone to danger. They met on the set of Cleopatra, a project that was so expensive and chaotic that it nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. However, it wasn't only the film that was incendiary. The performers themselves were more disorganized. They had an affair with each other. But the difficulty was that they were married to different individuals. This created a global controversy. It grew so bad that the Holy See intervened and denounced the encounter as sexual vagrancy. So why did Elizabeth dive into it? Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't concerned. After years of being controlled by studios, parents, and politicians, she wanted to take responsibility for her actions, even if they ruined her. However, Burton was no safe haven. Their relationship was marred by heated disagreements, fueled battles, and drama. She still wanted him. She desperately wanted him. She was crazy over that man. She married Richard twice. But were these fatal unions truly about love? Many people close to Elizabeth assumed she was reenacting the trauma she had endured as a teenager. That early loss of innocence, particularly the claimed night with John Kennedy, had corrupted her to the point that she associated love with agony, turmoil, and dominance. The more destructive the relationship, the more authentic it seemed to her. And Burton, well, let's just say he was talented, but broken. That indicates he fit the mold flawlessly. Spoiler, he wasn't the only one. Elizabeth had spent time with other politicians, not only John Kennedy. After him and Burton, Elizabeth married Senator John Warner, and she found herself back in the political arena. You might expect this to be her redemption arc, but instead of empowering, she found herself withering. The glamour and glam of Washington bore her, and Warner's goals overwhelmed her own. She said that she became a political wife with nothing to say, and that she quickly sank into a profound melancholy, leading her down a road of dogs, addiction, solitude, and several hospitalizations. Was it a coincidence that the two most influential men in her life, John F. Kennedy and Warner, both left her feeling powerless? This is not the troubling part. What's astounding is how little the public knew or cared. Elizabeth was always portrayed as a stunning, powerful idol, but underneath the jewels and legendary roles was a woman who was repeatedly mocked and exploited for her physique. What occurred next was simply horrible. Her sole sources of support became a holes, medications, and decays, all of which caused emotional breakdowns that made her feel more pitiful than a parasite. The funny thing is, Elizabeth was never permitted to be a victim. Even when she nearly killed herself from an overdose in the late 1970s, the headlines described her as disturbed, not hurt or mistreated, but simply a typical kid with minor difficulties. When she went to rehab, everyone scoffed at her. They ridiculed her for being too emotional. When she sought to speak up about the horrors she'd experienced, including the night Kennedy allegedly snatched her virginity, most people disregarded her. But why? Why was Elizabeth Taylor, one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses, never taken seriously when she implored people to help her and listen to her story? Timing is an important part of the solution. In the mid 20th century, girls like Elizabeth were supposed to smile and say nothing, even when males molested them. Sorry, we meant especially when abused by powerful men. She witnessed such terrible individuals become presidents. There was no space for controversy, particularly one involving a woman like her. Image was everything. Silence meant survival, and being abused was usual. However, the stillness came with a cost. Elizabeth Taylor didn't simply lose her childhood. She lost the capacity to trust, feel safe, and live without fear. Her marriages, breakups, and addictions all stem from a path she rarely mentioned publicly. But in private, she told her pals everything. How do we know what Elizabeth said about all of these affairs? And more importantly, to whom did she confess it? In the 1980s, Elizabeth became close friends with author and screenwriter Dominic Dunn. Dunn had previously been a Hollywood insider known for writing about the private lives of the wealthy and powerful. Elizabeth Taylor's struggles with public perception and the truth. According to many people close to him, Dunn stated that Elizabeth told him, off the record, that her connection with Kennedy was not consensual. She was 15, he was 30, and she had no idea what was going on. One of her associates revealed what Elizabeth's acquaintances used to say, and she didn't say it bitterly. She stated it as if it were simply another horrible thing that had happened to her, like it had become part of her tale. But that tale never made it to publication. Why? The name Kennedy was impenetrable. Even decades after his death, John F. Kennedy was regarded as a near religious figure in American politics. Even after his admitted relationships with Marilyn Monroe, Judith Exner, and Diana DeVay, his charm, assassination, and the mystique surrounding Camelot made it nearly hard for the people to believe any darker reality. And Elizabeth, despite her immense influence, understood the consequences of speaking out. Studios had previously silenced her. The press had distorted her statements, and she had learnt that certain guys were above accountability. Nevertheless, she found ways to suggest in a little-known 1992 interview with British journalist Barry Norman. Elizabeth was asked if she had ever met John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Her eyes narrowed. She paused. Then, with a small smile, she answered, "Yes, we met. Once. It was memorable. That was it." There are no details, there is no elaboration, just a cryptic comment that perplexed Norman and made others wonder what she didn't say. And it was not all. In the late 1990s, while working on one of her final biographies, Elizabeth sat down with a good friend and writer, C. David Heyman. Heyman had written extensively on the Kennedys and had been sued over it. According to the notes uncovered after his death, Elizabeth informed him of a night at the Beverly Hills Hotel in 1947 when she was asked to a political fundraiser by her mother and MGM executives. She alleged that a young senator in training picked her out, seduced her, and then escorted her upstairs alone while posing as a private suite tour. She recalled the champagne. She recalls his stating she was mature for her age. She recalls waking up sore and bewildered. But she also recalled what happened the next morning. Her mother advised her to smile and never talk about it again. You were chosen, she explained. It is an honor. An honor? Elizabeth has never forgotten those remarks. In her later years, she would describe that moment as the day she realized quiet was safer than truth. But why has she never gone public? Because even in the 2000s, the retaliation against women who spoke up, particularly against beloved individuals, was harsh. When other women spoke up about similar crimes by powerful men such as Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein, they were rejected, insulted, or labeled liars. Elizabeth was emotionally and physically weakened as a result of her own health issues. She was not ready to make headlines again. Perhaps she thought no one would believe her. After all, what would the world say if the lady they revered as Cleopatra confessed that she was once a prey? But the indicators were always present if you knew where to look. Later in life, Elizabeth became a strong champion for abuse victims. She gave millions to charity that helped women and children. She regularly talked about the need of breaking the silence and stating the truth, even if it was hazardous. Her comments were frequently disregarded as broad activism. People now recognize their error and understand what she meant. What do you believe she was saying about herself during the various periods of activism? Tell us in the comments section. One of the most telling incidents occurred in 2005, only 6 years before her death, during a private event at the Amphar Gala in Los Angeles. When asked why she supported groups that assisted survivors of sexual abuse, Elizabeth allegedly stated, because when I was a girl, no one protected me. Nobody said it was incorrect. They simply instructed me to keep quiet. No names or specifics. Those who understood her past, however, found the message deafening. Even in death, Elizabeth's reality remained hidden under layers of glitter, myth, and dread. However, recently discovered writings passed down by one of her closest assistants indicate that she intended the truth to be known, but only after her death. In one handwritten writing, she states, "The night with John was not love. It was stealing. He stole something I did not realize until long later, and everyone allowed him. They allowed him." What are your thoughts? Who are they? Her mother, MGM, or the political elite? The assistant who discovered her notebooks, whose name is protected for legal reasons, said there were more than 24 pages of intimate notes. Elizabeth finally named the trauma she had hinted at for decades. She didn't specifically mention John F. Kennedy, but the details were spot on. The hair, the charisma, the political aspirations, the blue eyes that did not flinch even when he lied. In one excerpt from 1993, she says, "He said I was the most beautiful girl he had ever seen. I wanted to trust him because I had been raised to accept men who said such things, particularly powerful guys. But when the door closed, the expression in his eyes shifted. That's when I realized I was not a person to him. I was something to take." That one line, "something to be taken," bears the weight of 1,000 victims and broken lives. If you think that's disgusting, you're not prepared for the following portion. More crushing details are revealed in a frightening new tell-all book titled Elizabeth Taylor, There Is Nothing Like a Dame. According to the book, Elizabeth, while a teenager, had an affair with Ronald Reagan, who was 36 at the time. Taylor's friend even cited her as stating, "Reagan was treating me like a grown woman," which thrilled me. After a long makeout session on the sofa, we headed into the bedroom. The book also includes the startling allegation that Elizabeth had a threesome with President John F. Kennedy and actor Robert Stack during a late-night naked swim in Kennedy's pool when both were married. The question is, how much of it was voluntary and how much was coerced. Elizabeth Taylor's story and the Me Too movement. And now that the Me Too movement has forced long overdue reckonings, we can finally consider what we should do with tales like Elizabeth's. Even though she was one of the world's most renowned ladies, she was unable to speak up. If she couldn't, what chance did anybody else stand? And if John Kennedy, one of the most revered men in American history, was capable of such behavior, what does this say about the society that shielded him? Elizabeth never viewed herself as a victim. That term, in fact, is rarely used in her texts. But she frequently discusses power, who has it, who doesn't, and how it is used to stifle those like her. She outlines a system that has trained her from infancy, studio executives who controlled her image, producers who treated her body as property, and politicians who ignored consequences. In one devastating essay, she muses on how that fateful night in 1947 influenced her lifelong idea of love and safety. I confused charm and affection. I believed that power was synonymous with affection. I didn't realize I could say no. Nobody told me that. Not once. It was more than simply one night. It was a structure composed of falsehoods and cruelty. Elizabeth Taylor's final wish. And no one knows how many men, including John Kennedy, entered that structure while the walls remained quiet. What we need to understand is that Elizabeth's ultimate wish was not vengeance. It was clarity. There was hope. She wanted young women to learn that being famous did not protect them, that beauty did not imply control, that even the world's most beloved actress might fall victim to the most despicable of scumbags. She wanted to let all the young ladies know that they had the right to say no. Women like Elizabeth made sacrifices that allowed them to live a better, more heard life. After reading this account of Elizabeth, you should understand why it took so long for anyone to listen to her. The solution is in how we have traditionally viewed women who relate these types of experiences, particularly strong women. People tend to doubt their motivations and sanity. We label them liars. We look into their pasts. We inquire about what they were wearing, what they drank, and who they slept with. Elizabeth Taylor got married 8 times. She had affairs. She was alluring and intriguing. And for some individuals, that would be enough to discredit her. But does any of this matter? Does a woman's sad background invalidate her right to tell the truth? Elizabeth Taylor's story is more than simply one night with John F. Kennedy. It's the story of a system that protected the powerful, punished the vulnerable, and taught a 15-year-old girl to smile despite a horrible experience. But the saddest thing is that the narrative isn't over. It is still going on. Now that her private writings have been made public, historians and campaigners are urging us to reconsider how we commemorate our idols. John F. Kennedy's womanizing has long been viewed as a footnote, a joke, or perhaps a symbol of manly achievement. But what if the affairs weren't limited to consenting adults? What if the reality is considerably darker? Elizabeth's story is still considered an unsubstantiated claim. She wasn't alive when she admitted to all of these accusations, but it was her wish to be heard after her death. The persons who silenced her when she was alive are now using this as leverage to argue that all of these charges are fiction and untrue, as the victim is not there to substantiate or testify. We all know that if she were still living, these individuals would have called her insulting things and kept this case hidden so that no one could find out the truth. At the end of the day, her legacy includes more than diamonds and violet eyes. It takes bravery to speak up when it is not safe to do so. In her final recorded interview, done just months before her death, Elizabeth was asked whether she had any regrets. She stared into the camera and stated, "I always hoped someone would hear the scream anyway." Before her rumored relationship with President John F. Kennedy, Elizabeth Taylor had already experienced 8 marriages, a series of high-profile marriages. Elizabeth Taylor's love life was characterized by a series of high-profile marriages and romances that were as showy and lavish as her Hollywood profession. She walked down the aisle 8 times with 7 different spouses, each of which drew attention from the media and the general public. Her first marriage was to Conrad Nicky Hilton, the heir to the Hilton Hotels business, whom she married when she was only 18. Even though their marriage was short-lived, it set the tone for Taylor's subsequent high-profile partnerships. She's second marriage was to British actor Michael Wilding, who was much older than she. This relationship was more steady than her previous, and they produced two sons, Michael Jr. and Christopher. However, after 10 years of marriage, the pair split, adding another chapter to her turbulent romantic past. The next important guy in Taylor's life was Mike Todd, a film producer known for his extravagant lifestyle. Taylor was completely in love with Todd, and their relationship appeared to be destined for long-term bliss. The marriage produced a daughter, Elizabeth Frances, who subsequently became known as Liza Todd. Todd tragically perished in an aircraft crash in 1958, barely 1 year after their marriage. This death saddened Taylor and left a lasting emotional scar on her, prompting her to pursue relationships with a number of other renowned men in the years since. Following Todd's death, Taylor married pop singer Eddie Fisher, who had previously married her close friend, actress Debbie Reynolds. Taylor and Fisher's marriage was heavily ridiculed, with many considering it as an affair that had ended another famous marriage. However, the relationship was brief and the pair split after 5 years due to Fisher's adultery and issues with substance misuse. Taylor's marriage to Richard Burton is perhaps the most well-known of her several. Their extraordinary love affair, which was both passionate and dramatic, became one of the most talked about romances of the 1960s and 1970s. Taylor and Burton's marriage was defined by their frequent public disagreements, mutual love of excess, and emotional instability. Despite the instability, they were genuinely in love, and their marriage ended and then reignited in 1975 when they remarried for a short period before separating permanently. Their romance, marked by both reunion and separation, enthralled the public, and their tragic love story became a distinguishing feature of Taylor's personal life. Following Burton, Taylor married John Warner, a U.S. Senator from Virginia, and this marriage was far more secret than her previous partnerships, and it was an attempt to get away from the spotlight for a bit. Warner was a steady, politically prominent man, but after 6 years of marriage, they divorced in 19. Despite Warner's introduction of stability into Taylor's life, it appeared that her heart was still longing for something more. Her final marriage was in 1991 to construction worker Larry Fortensky, who was far distant from the flash and glamour of Hollywood. Fortensky and Taylor met in rehab, where they were each receiving therapy for different personal difficulties. Their marriage was first perceived as surprising by the public owing to their huge age difference and Fortensky's humble upbringing in comparison to Taylor's elite Hollywood reputation. However, their romance remained relatively quiet, and the pair married in a ceremony at Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch. This marriage, while full of love and happiness for Taylor in her latter years, ended in 1996, her eighth and final go down the aisle. Despite her spectacular array of spouses, Elizabeth Taylor's love life was everything from monogamous. She was recognized for having several affairs and extramarital relationships with some of the most prominent and influential men of her period. Among them were Howard Hughes, a reclusive wealthy industrialist, and Frank Sinatra, the iconic vocalist famous for his own turbulent love life. She also had a highly known affair with Henry Kissinger, the former U.S. Secretary of State, which was often discussed in political circles. Taylor was also romantically associated with Malcolm Forbes, the affluent publisher of Forbes magazine, in a short-lived but intense romance. These encounters received widespread media attention, cementing her reputation as a lady who lived a life of perpetual splendor, desire, and controversy. In addition to her sexual relationships, Elizabeth Taylor was a loving mother. She had 3 children of her own, 2 boys, Michael Jr. and Christopher, and one daughter, Elizabeth Frances. In addition to her own children, Taylor adopted a girl called Maria, the daughter of a close friend. Taylor was very protective of her children, and despite the turbulence in her personal life, She fought hard to keep them safe from the tremendous media scrutiny that followed her every step. Her children were her world, and in her latter years, she was particularly concerned with providing a secure and caring atmosphere for them. Elizabeth Taylor's personal relationships were just as compelling as her on-screen appearances. The drama of her 8 marriages, numerous relationships, and dedication to her children heightened the attraction of one of Hollywood's most legendary and complicated women. Her love life, which was full of both victory and sorrow, exemplified the profound emotional intensity and sensitivity that made her an iconic character in both the cinema and celebrity culture. Health struggles. While the world saw the glitz and glamour, the jewels, the Oscars, the legendary romances behind the scenes, she endured a lifetime of medical challenges that began as early as the 1950s and continued until her death in 2000. These struggles profoundly shaped both her personal journey and the public's perception of her resilience. Her health problems began in her 20s and they never truly relented. Over the years, Taylor underwent more than 20 major surgeries, a staggering number that included complex procedures like spinal surgery following an accident, emergency operations, and treatments for chronic illnesses. By the end of her life, she had been hospitalized at least 70 times. Among her most serious battles was a near-fatal case of pneumonia in 1961, which required an emergency tracheotomy. She also suffered from recurring back problems that began after a horseback riding injury during the filming of National Velvet when she was just a teenager. These spinal issues would haunt her for the rest of her life, leading to numerous operations and chronic pain. Her physical suffering contributed to another battle, addiction. Over time, Taylor developed a dependence on prescription painkillers and alcohol, a struggle intensified by the medications she took and the emotional toll of constant pain. In the 1980s, she became one of the first major celebrities to openly seek treatment for addiction, checking into the Betty Ford Center. Her honesty helped break down taboos around substance abuse and pave the way for others to seek help without shame. In 2004, her health took another serious turn when she was diagnosed with congestive heart failure, a chronic condition where the heart cannot pump blood efficiently. Yet even after this diagnosis, she continued to appear in public when she could and remained deeply committed to charitable work, especially her advocacy for HIV/AIDS awareness through the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. In 2009, she underwent a minimally invasive procedure to repair a leaky heart valve. Though the surgery was successful and she expressed her gratitude on social media, it was clear her body was growing weaker. In her final years, Taylor was mostly confined to a wheelchair and required constant medical care. On March 23, 2011, Elizabeth Taylor passed away at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles at the age of 79. The cause was congestive heart failure. So there you have it. Which classic Hollywood figure do you think had the most untold stories? Comment below. We might just explore their story next. If this video moved you, give it a like. Subscribe for more untold stories from the golden age of film. And share this with anyone who believes legends deserve to be remembered for who they truly were. Thank you for watching. See you next time.